I didn't have a specific question. I was hoping maybe you could just talk for a minute kind of about the Occupy movements going across the world right now and how they drew their experience and their inspiration from the Arab Spring in general. Maybe you could just talk about that for a minute.
Well, I think the Occupy movement is very important, and I sympathize with many ideas of the Occupy movement, and I believe that the Occupy movement has to somehow realize that they are living in a democracy and has to somehow find a way to pressurize the elected officials in this country or in any other country. Actually, I had a conversation with some people in Wall Street yesterday in New York and last week in front of St. Paul's Cathedral in London that it's very important for young people or older people even in the Western democracies to understand that they are living in a democracy, that their elected officials need their votes, and they need to use these elected officials and the fact that their votes count in order to send a message to their leaders. And Occupy movement as a symbol, as a way to express yourself, as a way to vent your anger against the corrupt bankers and greedy financiers is all fine and good, but I think at the end it's very important to pressurize the elected officials.
I've heard now, I kind of got a little different take from you about the 1953 coup of Mossadegh. What I heard, and maybe you could just say a little bit more about how the oil played a role. What I've heard is that Mossadegh was planning to nationalize the oil in Iran, and so I never heard that really it was about the communist, the Russian influence. So that's good to know that. So how much was that a role, the nationalization of oil and our desire to prevent that?
Yeah, well, what happened was that Mossadegh was elected in 1951 as prime minister by the parliament, and he nationalized the oil a few days later. So the British, they started a campaign against Mossadegh, and also they started to scare the Americans that if Mossadegh if he remains in power, he's going to have a weak government, and as a result, the strong communist party in Iran, which was illegal at the time, but Mossadegh gave them the freedom to act, would come to power, and that would result in a Soviet occupation of Iran. Mossadegh made a couple of mistakes. He did not understand the extent of fear that the Americans had of the Soviet invasion at the time, and Mossadegh somehow played into the hands of the British, because he would go to Truman, for example. He came to the United States, he met President Truman, and Truman was very sympathetic to the nationalization part of what Mossadegh wanted to do. But on the other hand, the Americans, they somehow tried to find a way to make a compromise between Mossadegh and the National Iranian Oil Company. But Mossadegh kept on saying that if you don't support me, he told the Americans that if you don't support me, the communists would come to power. And at the same time, the British, they were using all their resources in order to weaken Mossadegh. So while Mossadegh was being weakened, the Americans' fear was growing. And at the end of 1952, when Eisenhower was elected as president, and at the beginning of 1953, when he came to power and he brought Dulles brothers, he assigned Allen Dulles as the head of the CIA and John Foster Dulles as the Secretary of State. Dulles brothers, they thought that they could not work with Mossadegh because of his anti-British and weak approach to the Soviets. And that's why the CIA, that was primarily why the CIA staged the coup against Mossadegh, because of that. But also CIA, I mean, you have to understand that at the time CIA was a very young organization, composed of very young people. You know, the average age of the people who took part in the 1953 coup was 35. So these were young war veterans who were looking for adventure, who had infinite resources, who had an ambition, and who had a real enemy in front of them, and they were quite motivated, and they did it successfully. And the Iranian coup was the first one. The next one was in Guatemala. The other one was in Congo. On September 11, 1973, they had a coup in Chile. So it was mainly because of that. Eventually, this narrowing gap between the elite, the educated people, and the masses, it will result into the demise of the Islamic Republic. I'm very hopeful, very optimistic about the long-term future of Iran, and I think that because people are becoming increasingly educated, they can, young people, they can succeed, and Iran can become a more democratic country. But in the short term, I'm not sure. I'm quite pessimistic because I think the Revolutionary Guards, they will try to widen this gap through sheer brutal force and by imprisoning people, by even killing people. And on the other hand, by developing the nuclear program, for military nuclear program. And unfortunately, it's a volatile, Iran is in a very volatile region, and who knows what kind of action Israel, Saudi Arabia, and any other country that is an enemy of Iran at the moment can take.